All right, welcome to the Sharp Mind Show, episode 15. All right, this episode is brought to you by InserCell.com. Pick you up a cool inspirational t shirt today because what you wear matters. All right, so we're going to start out with my beloved Carolina Panthers, now 0-2. Now, before the extent of the season, if you started 0-2, the likelihood of you making the playoffs went down to about 20%. So, I don't think anything's going to be different now with the Carolina Panthers, but not saying our season's completely over, but it definitely is going to be a tough road ahead, right, to make the playoffs, right? But Bryce Young turns the ball over twice in the first 6 plays, right? Giving the Cardinals a 10-point advantage, really before, 7-point advantage for sure before the defense even got on the field, but a 10-point advantage, very early in the game, right? And you just can't do this. Like, the turnovers is what cost us the game, right? Now, I will say that the Panthers, I'm very proud of the Panthers for trying to come back. In a big game, you had a big game from Renfrow, but it was just not enough, right? And, it looks like, we had great stats and all that kind of stuff, but you got to realize when a team is up, 27-7, they're literally sitting back in a prevent defense just trying to keep you in front of them, right? And so, you kind of pad the stats, all of a sudden everybody's wide open, and you're hitting them. They went from, we're, really pressuring Bryce to, we're only rushing 4, that kind of thing for the Cardinals. So, yes, we did come back, but it was because they were basically in the prevent defense and we were in our 2-minute drill, right? Now, this is what I will say. So we're in it late. We just got the fumble recovery, not the fumble recovery. We just got the kickoff, we just got the onside kick recovery, right? First time in 89 games, apparently, that we had got our onside kick recovery. But, they kept sending the whole team vertical, and you'd have the dump off right here to Chuba Hubbard, right? And so we're sitting on like the 45-yard line of the Cardinals, and you see everybody go with the deep threats, and Chuba's just sitting here by himself, no problem, right? And you got to think in that situation because it's hard to get a 40-yard touchdown, right? We got one timeout, by the way. It's hard to get a 40-yard touchdown. It's a lot easier to get, a touchdown when you're sitting on somebody's 25-yard line or 30-yard line than it is if you're sitting in the 45 back in the 50, right? But you literally could just see, like, the Cardinals defensive line just take off, not even having any kind of threat of a running attack, right? But, it was basically them teeing off, and then, obviously the game ended with a sack of Bryce Young. But that late in the game, you got that much coverage. Like, I'd love to see him have dumped that ball off to Chuba Hubbard. You probably got Chuba down to the 25, 30, between the 30 and the 25-yard line before he even met anybody. And he could have just went out of bounds too, say he went out of bounds at the 35. And you did that again for one more play. Now you're at the 25. And, he was wide open. Like, if you go back and look at the tape, he's definitely wide open, right? But, like I say, you're trying to do too much there, right? You're trying to get 40 yards on one throw when the whole team is trying to prevent you from getting 40 yards on one throw, and you don't have the time because the defensive line is just taking off, right? And so if you only got 3 seconds, you got to throw it out in 3 seconds. It is what it is, right? And that happens to a lot of young quarterbacks. Let's say it's his 3rd year in the league, but we really have to do better. Obviously, T-Mac had a great game. Leggett was basically like not involved in the game. Might as well just sat on the sideline. Was never open. I say the only times I saw him throwing the ball, he was basically completely covered up. Let's say tough duckies there. You definitely got to, rock with the defense. The defense definitely came up big with a pick. A couple sacks on Kyler Murray. Definitely kept the team in the game, only giving up 27 points, when they were already down 10-0 before, basically only giving up 17 points, because they were, already down because of the turnover. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What do you think? Can the Carolina Panthers make the playoffs this year, now being 0-2? Are they that bad of a team, or, are they just the turnovers are just getting them early, right? Let me know what you think in the comments below. All right, so this episode is brought to you by London and the Goo Goo, which is my wife's book. If you have nieces, nephews, or children of your own, make sure you pick up London and the Goo Goo. It's good for all ages, up to 10, 12 years old. It's got a great moral, great story. So pick up London and the Goo Goo in the description below. It's also available on Amazon. And hope you enjoy it, guys. All right, so got a little life coach scenario here. So Derek is a 50-year-old factory worker and says his plant is shutting down. He says he's too young to retire, but too old to start over in a new field of study, right? You're going to see this a lot more, guys, with the evolution of AI, the evolution of robotics. Like, you're going to see even the factories that we do have, the factory might not shut down, but the robots take over the jobs, right? You just don't have the jobs that you used to have in the actual factory. Because if you can get a robot, not messing around on a forklift, that kind of stuff, like, it's a lot cheaper for the company to, have the robot not messing around than, bored factory worker that is moving pallets and just messing around with his other workers. But so you're 50 years old, you find yourself out of a job, and you're in a factory town where the factory is shutting down. Well, pray that you saw it coming, number one, because, selling your house after the factory shuts down is going to be pretty tough, right? But that's exactly what I would do. If I'm a factory worker, I'm going to find another factory and I'm moving, right? Simple as that. We grew up here, whatever, it doesn't matter. The town is going to be shutting down without that factory, right? If you're a factory town. And so you see that, all down this, in South Carolina, they basically had a corridor where all the manufacturing used to be, and every little town had its own little manufacturing plant. All those towns are desolate wastelands, right? Except for like Fort Mill, South Carolina, right near Charlotte, right? Where you got banking jobs that took over and you can drive into Charlotte and do the banking jobs. But so, like I say, you're 50 years old, retirement's basically nothing. You were planning on the pension from the factory. Well, not sure about your pension, whether you're going to even get it or not. That kind of thing, that would be my advice here. Like, I can't even really say anything really else about it, but like I say, you live on what you got in retirement. So you live on your 401k, live on whatever you need to do to make ends meet in the time being until you can get another factory job. But that being said, just because you're, you feel like you're too old to, go into a new position or whatever, you do need to make sure that you're keeping up with whatever industry needs you to keep up with so that you're competitive in the market until you're 65. because the market doesn't care what age you are, how many years experience you have, blah, blah, blah. If you only care about, if you don't care about nothing, then, the market's not going to care about you. So you have to care about and make sure you keep up with what's going on in the market, right? So like for my job, the easiest way to do that is to get these magazines that come out for free, Waterworks magazines, stuff like that. And they basically, bring up all these topics, and all you got to do is kind of read the magazine once a month, and you kind of can keep up with what's going on, right, in your industry. Also, they got continuing ed, that kind of thing. But you always want to make yourself, better in the marketplace. But as far as what I would tell Derek to do, like, let's say if you're a factory worker, that's all you're going to be. Obviously we got to go find you another factory somewhere and move your family there. And when you get there, that's where we're going to put you on this plan. Okay, you're 50 years old. You're trying to be, you have to you retire at 65. You might have 15 years left, but we got to get you on the fast track here to, get you enough money so that you can retire, so you can be financially free, right? So hopefully, we get you another job, 60 years old, you're financially free, and you can retire at 60 if you want to. That would be my goal, working with Derek, and hope that helps you guys with that kind of stuff. But the middle class jobs have been disappearing a long time, right? That's why there's this big gap between the rich and the poor right now, is because, all our senators and that kind of thing, they all sold us out to foreign workers, right? They thought it would keep costs down, that kind of thing. And instead it really backfired, because eventually all the money ends up wherever the factory is, right? So the factories in China, that's where all the money ends up. Factories in India, that's where all the money ends up. So, you have to be able to, the rich person got rich though, right? The people that own the companies. So if you owned Apple in 2000s, Apple took their iPhone to China. Guess what? Apple got rich. The people that owned Apple got rich, but the factory workers that would have made that stuff in the United States, they got poorer, right? So, you got to keep that in mind. That's why following, what's going on in the stock market, like say, oh, I'm a normal person, I don't care what's going on in the stock market. Yeah, you do. You don't follow politics. That's why you follow politics. You don't follow politics, to harass your neighbor because of what they believe. You follow politics so they don't screw you out of jobs and send them overseas, right? But that's what happened in the 90s, and we're 35 years later on that, and you're seeing this big gap, right? So keep that in mind, and obviously we got to do the best we can. So, all right, so we're going to move on to the quote of the day. All right. And it says, inflation doesn't touch the value of a determined mind. All right. So right now we're living in one of the highest inflation times in the history of the United States, right? The money printer is just printing money. The regulations and stuff like that has made it where housing is unaffordable. Interest rates make it where housing is unaffordable. And that's from rent to owning a home. It doesn't matter, right? Regular people can't afford a $2,000 a month apartment when that, apartment should be $800, $900, right? So, but what does this quote mean, right? This quote means that it doesn't matter what the market's doing. If you're determined, if you have the drive and the want to, you can figure out how to manage the market and get rich anyway, right? So, yes, inflation's high, but it's never been easier to start a business, right, in the United States, right? Matter of fact, startup business costs might be less than $1,000 right now, right? And like I say, I started my business, InserSale.com, with less than $500, right? And that was including samples at the time. And the samples, I've told this before, but the samples came back, and that, I ordered a 3X, and it was literally like, half of one of my legs, as far as the size. So, ended up giving that away as Christmas presents to some smaller people in my family. But, we, it's definitely interesting. But like I say, I was still determined, even though I made that, decision, I'll get the samples, and the samples came back like that. I still was determined to start my brand, right? And that my brand would mean something, that my brand would, when somebody saw the word InserSale, they couldn't even pronounce it. InserSale. And I'm sitting here like, well, I bet there's still people out there that call Nike, right? So it's really about, getting the message out there. What does the brand mean? It doesn't matter if there's inflation or not inflation. If your brand has a good message and the right things, it's going to do well, right? So that's what InserSale.com is about. InserSale.com is, about wearing inspirational messages so that, not only do you inspire the people around you, but you look and see those inspirational messages yourself, which one hits your heart the best, right? So go check those out at InserSale.com. And that's it for the quote of the day. So be determined and figure out how to get yourself to where you want to be, right? If you need help doing that, I'm Nate, and I'm a life coach, right? So if you need help figuring out, how to get to where you want to be, hit me up in my IG DMs. Text me 919-480-1370. Email me at fitfuturemd@gmail.com. And let's get you started with life coaching, man. Like, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to get what you want in 2025, right? Let's say, and there's this huge, with inflation, there's this huge pay gap. There's no reason not to go for being rich instead of being poor, right? When you're rich, you at least have choices. So that's what we're going to try to get to. And let's do it. Let's make it happen, right? So one way to make it happen is through the stock market, right? So, luckily these big CEOs and stuff, they have to file when they make trades, right? So you can kind of follow, especially in some of these smaller companies, if something's going good, you'll kind of see, the CEOs, the COOs start making moves on that company before the company pops, right? So, the CEO of Kura Oncology bought $400,000 worth of his stock, in September, and $300,000 worth of his stock in August, right? It's a $700 million market cap company, so not very expensive, under $10, right? I think it's $8.19 right now as of today, right? $8.19 as of today. And they are waiting on an FDA review of their cancer treatment, right? That, is supposed to happen in November, right? So he's buying August, September. I bet he'll buy another 400,000, 500,000 in October before, this stuff comes out in November, right? But what you'll see happen here is so this stock's at $9. This information will come out, or it's at $8, sorry. The stock is at $8. You'll see this information come out, and then all of a sudden this thing's at $18, but then it'll do this, $18, and then it'll just flat. While everybody else is jumping in, the powers that be are selling it off, right? So the only way, you would actually be able to take advantage of this is if you knew this guy was buying like this, right? So it's not financial advice, but this is kind of this is something we're looking for to try to beat the market, right? So, all right, normally, you tell people to invest 15% of their income, right? Well, you can take 1 or 2% of that 15% and do stuff like this, right? So say we'll make the math easy. You're making 50K, 10% of 50K is $5,000. So that's $7,500 a year, being invested, right? So, I find out something like this, I might take $500 of that $7,500 and throw it into something like this, right? All of a sudden, this thing goes, from $8 to $16. All of a sudden, I got $1,000, right? So, it's not a huge win. Like I say, you didn't throw 10 grand in there or nothing like that. But if you do this for 4 or 5 years and say this is only one company, right? So you do that, it breaks, you find another one, it breaks, you find another one, it breaks. All of a sudden you've made an extra 2 grand this year, an extra 3 grand. And then you do it again the next year, and then next year, and it compounds and compounds and compounds, right? So you used it on a small portion of your portfolio, especially as a regular investor, or a person that's not a full-time investor, or they call it a retail investor, right? You're not a full-time investor. You find something like this, you might put a little bit into it, get the pop, get out, and, make a little extra money for yourself. So, you want to go on that vacation that year, you got extra $500. Your kid needs whatever, you can afford Christmas presents that year, that kind of thing, right? But this is not the strategy of, okay, I'm going to get rich off this strategy, because, this $500, okay, so what if they come back in November and the FDA has completely trashed their cancer treatment? Well, instead of it being $8, now it's going to be back to almost zero, $1, right? You saying you go from 500 down to 100 or whatever, $50, right? So you can easily lose the money just as fast. But usually, if you see CEOs buying in, they know something, that they know their treatment works, right? And they can't come out and say, "Oh, my treatment works," without the FDA approving it. But like I say, 99% of the time they know they're going to get, approved. But it's not financial advice, but this is just what they experience, right? So this has been the Sharp Mind Show, episode 15. As you see, what we're trying to do on this podcast is talk about things that are intelligent, right? We're not sitting here talking about, I do talk about some football, right? I do love football, but at the same time, I'm talking about inflation. I'm talking about stocks. I'm talking about career movements here today, right? Like, that's what this podcast is about. The podcast is about, or this show is about, really, talking about intelligent things, talking about, things you should, you used to be able to do this with coworkers and stuff like that, but with today's education environment, like, it's just not there. It's like you're nobody's interested in this kind of stuff. They just want to go in and do their job, and that's it, right? So, or you may not even be going into you may not even be in the office for a job, so you have nobody to bounce stuff like this off with. So that's what the Sharp Mind Show is about. Let's get your mind sharp, right? Let's get you to financial freedom as fast as humanly possible. I'm Nate, and I'm a life coach. If you're interested in that, make sure you click the link in the description below. I charge $2,000 for a year of life coaching instead of charging $150 an hour like most life coaches. And like I say, you can see Dave Ramsey trying to do these financial coaches for $150 an hour. These guys are going to be minimum 3 hours. So that's $450, and you probably never see the guy again. You're going to get me for a whole year, every week, one-on-one coaching. And if I don't make you better within that year, you get your $2,000 back. It's a no-brainer. Sign up today. Make sure you shop at answersale.com. Pick up a cool inspirational t-shirt. Go get London in the Goo Goo Goo, and we'll see you guys in the next piece.